Hey everybody, Roger says hey too. Okay, so it's been about a week or so since we have done World War One, and I am planning to do a couple of these a week to try and get through the series much faster, so never fear, this is going to be the first episode of this week. We'll have another one coming up in probably a couple of days. Okay, so week one of this Great War series left off. We still have not even started the war yet. I was kind of expecting the war to at least get started, like, you know, guns start shooting or something in the week one video, but nope. So maybe it'll happen in week two. Not that I'm like eager for guns, you know, to start shooting and people to get killed or anything, but you know, I just kind of want to see how this war really gets started. Like, who fires the first shot, you know? So we'll see if this video gets into that or not. But first, you guys know what time it is. It is comment time, and we're going to look at a few of your comments from the last video. So our first comment comes from Fish Fingers and Custard. You know what? You guys throw out some really good names in the comment time, that's for sure. He or she says, as Captain Blackletter once said on why World War I started, the reason for this whole thing was that it was too much effort not to have a war. Most of you guys have probably already seen the video I released last week of the Blackadder scene, where they do talk about how World War I began. I thought it was a really good scene and do plan to watch the rest of the series eventually, but that line definitely stuck out for me, and I actually mentioned it in the video. It's a really simple way to put it, but it's also super profound at the same time. There's all of this build up to the war. I think it was too much effort to not have the war in a couple of ways. Based on what I'm learning in this series, all of these nations were just really rife with tension, and it's almost like a war just had to happen for them to kind of like get past their differences. And also, a lot of you made the point that, you know, they had already put into motion the beginnings of this war, and it would have been almost impossible to like recall troops and equipment and all of that stuff because it was just a huge undertaking. So once it kind of got started, there really was no stopping it. Andrew Warwick says, so this comes out the exact day that Sabaton announces their new album, which will also be on the Great War. I had forgotten about that, actually. I had heard that. Some of you guys had mentioned that in previous videos, that Sabaton's next album was the Great War. Now, I have done, I think, 3 of their songs in previous videos before. A lot of you guys have requested me to do Ghost Division, and I think that's going to be the next one I do. I'm probably going to try to put that out on Sunday for Music Sundays. Sabaton is also playing a concert about 3 hours from me in October. I might try to go. I'm not sure. Ying Han Tan says, just a little aside, you'll probably find yourself mixing up the Balkans with the Baltics, which I've been guilty of before. The Balkans are Serbia, Bosnia, Montenegro, Romania, Bulgaria, modern-day Slovenia, Croatia, etc. The Baltics are modern-day Lithuania, Estonia, and Latvia. Okay, I do know where all of those countries are. I have heard both terms before, the Balkans and the Baltics, but I did not realize that they were actual different regions of Europe. So I appreciate you guys commenting on this. You guys taught me a little bit about European geography that I did not know about. And yes, I did say Baltics in the last video when I meant the Balkans. In my head, there was no difference, but I appreciate you guys pointing out that there is a huge difference. So I will try and not make that mistake again. Grofili says the comment about the Archduke isn't completely correct. Archdukes aren't in any level of nobility at all, in a way. It's a title exclusively reserved for the male members of the House of Habsburg, regardless of their other noble rank or title. Slight problem, I don't really know what the House of Habsburg is. I'm assuming it's the royal family of Austria. I've heard of it before in passing, but I don't think I've ever actually learned what it is. But you guys say that it doesn't necessarily mean nobility, which makes me think that maybe it's not the royal family. So yeah, I'm a little still kind of uncertain about that. Maybe you guys can explain to me what the House of Habsburg is down in the comments and kind of clarify a little bit of that for me. And Brandon Atchison says the majority of European governments at this time were still monarchies, with the notable exception of the French Republic. These monarchies ranged from absolute Russia, semi-constitutional Germany, and constitutional UK, but most had a tendency to be autocratic and very authoritarian regimes. Yes, but how long did the French Republic last? Because I know that they're on like, what, their 5th or 6th republic now, so Didn't they like always waffle between like republics and the monarchy or whatever? That is a very good point in remembering just like the history of Europe being very, you know, dominated by monarchies. You mentioned like semi-constitutional and constitutional. Kind of have an idea that that is a form of a monarchy where the monarchy is held in check by either the people or a parliament or something like that. But I don't really know exactly how it works, so I definitely have to look into like what a constitutional monarchy is. I understand what an absolute monarchy is, and I think when most Americans hear the term monarchy, we're thinking about absolute monarchies. But it is interesting that even in World War I, which I consider a pretty modern era, I mean, it was just 100 years ago, that is still fairly modern, but Europe was still not really used to having all of these, like, I guess more republic forms of government that it has now. I guess I didn't realize just like how recent a lot of the monarchies are, and they still exist. Like the UK still has a queen, and I know a lot of the European countries have monarchies, like Sweden still has a king, I think. So it's quite different to what we're used to over here with a government with no monarchy whatsoever. So you'll have to forgive Americans for getting confused. Like I've brought up in previous videos, we just really don't have a very good concept of a monarchy in the same way that Europeans do, just because we don't have experience with it. Okay, so I'm gonna leave your comments there. Appreciate you guys leaving them for me. Always look forward to reading them, so I hope you guys do it for this video as well. And we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna get into week 2 of the Great War series. Looking forward to Indy Nidell teaching me some more new stuff today. This one's titled Germany and Two-Front War and the Schlieffen-Plan. Yeah, you guys know me trying to pronounce these foreign words. So Germany Two-Front War, don't really know what that refers to. I don't know what fronts they're fighting, and I have no idea what the Schlieffen-Plan is. It sounds German, so I'm assuming it's a German plan, but I don't know. All right, let's learn about it.
My name is Indy Nidell, and welcome to the Great War. We left off last time with the Austro-Hungarian Empire declaring war on the Kingdom of Serbia, and I'm going to begin today with a couple of telegrams. Now, in Russia, there were very real fears that Austria's plans might extend to more than just Serbian occupation or Serbian punishment. Russia thought that Serbia might actually lose her independence. You see, Austria had mobilized 3/4 of her army, which was way more than enough to deal with Serbia. So on July 29th, as Austria began bombarding Belgrade, Russia partially mobilized her army just in case. The Tsar, though, did not want a war with Germany, who had pledged to support Austria-Hungary. So he telegraphed his cousin, Kaiser Wilhelm, quote, "To try to avoid such a calamity as a European war, I beg you, in the name of our old friendship, to do what you can to stop your allies from going too far." End quote. He signed it, Nicky. At the same time, the Kaiser was telegraphing back, quote, "I am exerting the utmost influence to induce the Austrians to deal straightly, to arrive at a satisfactory understanding with you." End quote. This was signed, Willie. However, that same day, the German fleet began to mobilize, and in response, the British fleet was sent to its war stations in the North Sea in case of a possible attack. Now, at that point, the allied pair of France and Russia were putting pressure on Britain to declare that in case of a German attack on Russia's ally France, Britain would join the war. But Britain, especially the Foreign Secretary Sir Edward Grey, wouldn't commit. Okay, important stuff now. Germany told Britain in a secret message that if Britain remained neutral, Germany would take no territory from France except her colonies. This provoked the opposite effect, though, showing Grey once and for all that Germany was committed to going to war against Russia. Now, in Russia on the 29th, there was no declaration of war, but a draft of nearly 6 million men began, and the army was already moving towards the Austrian border. And it was at 5 p.m. on July 30th that the Russian general mobilization began. See, the Tsar finally signed this order because of partial German mobilization and his worries about being unready on the Polish front.
Okay guys, I hate to admit this, but I'm a little confused on who's on what side right now. This thing is very complicated with the alliances And I'm having to like sort through what I know from World War II and more modern times and trying to like put that aside and put this in its own context for World War I, trying to remember that things are different. I'm a little confused again, and maybe this is because it's been a week since I've watched this and I don't remember the alliances from the last video. I apologize for having to rehash some of this stuff, but oh my gosh, guys, this is why I can't have a week go between these videos. I know, you guys don't have to lecture me on it. Maybe as I watch the rest of this, it'll sort itself out here.
It all actually got a little confusing here. Okay, German Chancellor Bethmann Hollweg telegraphed Vienna not to mobilize against Russia, but the same day, German Chief of Staff Moltke telegraphed his opposite Austrian number Conrad, mobilize at once. So who was really in charge? And then Germany sent Russia an ultimatum to stop all war measures of any kind against Austria and Germany within 24 hours. This was rejected.
Okay, so
now you can
Germany
see that
and
this was
Austria
becoming
together.
a real mess, but at the end of July, all of the various armies were pressuring their political leaders because many of the leaders were against the war, but the armies were afraid of being unready, and they all wanted to move as quickly as possible.
Okay, I think Germany and Austria are together, which makes sense because I know that they're kind of like, I don't know how to put it, not the same country, but they're from the same like, German territory or whatever. I know that they kind of go together. Serbia is, I've learned through this, is Slavic, which, then relates to Russia. So Russia's backing Serbia. Germany and Austria are together, I guess. We have the UK, France, Russia, and Serbia on one side, Germany and Austria-Hungary on the other. I think that's right.
On July 29th, a German ultimatum to Belgium was prepared. What? Belgium?
We got Belgium involved?
Well, little neutral Belgium? Why Belgium, you ask? Here's why. See, if Germany was going to war with Russia, she could not help but be worried about France invading her from behind because, again, France and Russia were committed allies. So here was the idea, the moment you've all been waiting for, the Schlieffen-Plan. Alfred von Schlieffen had been the German Army Chief of Staff from 1891 to 1905, and here was his big idea in case of a war with both Russia and France. France would have to be knocked out of the war immediately so all of the troops could focus on the more daunting task of attacking Russia, okay? So Germany would make a swift attack through Holland and Belgium, completely bypassing the heavily defended Franco-German border and sweeping down into Paris from the north. Moltke streamlined the plan a bit by skipping Holland, but the idea was to take Paris within 6 weeks and thus avoid a two-front war. Now,
didn't they do this in World War II as well? Isn't that how they kind of like went about it?
we'll go into that in more depth later. But Belgium was neutral, and Britain had a treaty with her. And on July 31st, Britain asked France and Germany if they would respect Belgian neutrality. France said yes, but Germany did not respond. So Britain eventually sent an ultimatum of her own. If Belgium were attacked, Britain would go to war. In all of these countries, people were enlisting like crazy, and nationalistic fever was going off the rails. In France, for example, Jean Jaurès, leader of the Socialist Party, who was appealing to all the European working classes to stop the war, was assassinated on the 31st.
Oh.
Ironically, this actually caused more shock around Europe than Franz Ferdinand's assassination did. But it showed that in France there was a great deal of enthusiasm for the war. See, many people wanted revenge for the loss against Prussia over 40 years earlier. Back to Russia and Germany. Now, the day after Russia mobilized, Germany also mobilized. Now, this was presented in the Reichstag as purely defensive, okay? We have to mobilize to defend ourselves because they did it first. And this was pretty much the only way the German military high command could convince the Social Democrats to agree with the mobilization. And on the evening of August 1st, the German ambassador gave Russia the German declaration of war, which resulted from Russia rejecting the German ultimatum to stand down. Actually, as it turned out, the German ambassador actually gave the Russians two versions of the declaration of war. One that claimed Russia refused to respond to Germany, and one that said the Russian response was unacceptable. Yep, that's the kind of thing you want to avoid in a diplomatic service. The Kaiser at first ordered an attack on only Russia, but Moltke convinced him this wasn't really possible since most of the army was already committed in the West. And that evening, German troops entered Luxembourg to secure the telegraph and the railways. Here we go. On August 2nd, German troops crossed into France for the first time in over 40 years, and there were several small border skirmishes. At 7 that evening, Germany gave Belgium an ultimatum. Give German troops free passage through Belgium. Belgium refused. On August 3rd, Germany declared war on France, and that same day occupied 3 towns in Russian Poland. On August 4th, German troops entered Belgium, and Britain declared war on Germany. Now, many of those in England who had been anti-war before were suddenly very much for the war. Grey, the Foreign Secretary, for example, now believed that if Germany wasn't stopped, then all European national independence was just a fiction. In the Mediterranean...
Hang on. Okay, where is German Poland? Is that this little, the red bit jutting out between Austria-Hungary and Germany? Is that Russian Poland? Because I know Poland's right there. Current day Poland's right there. But obviously it's split between Germany and Russia, it looks like. So I'm assuming that's where it is. See, I don't think I've heard, and you guys have referred in past videos, that Poland used to be part of Russia, but this is not really something I'm very familiar with. So this is kind of like the first time it's really sinking in that Poland used to not exist as a country and used to be part of Russia. So Poland is one of those countries that was formed from Western Russia. Oh my gosh, guys. There's a lot for me to learn about European history and maps and geography and all of that. I'm gonna go back a little bit because I was thinking about that in the last few seconds of him talking.
Now, many of those in England who had been anti-war before were suddenly very much for the war. Grey, the Foreign Secretary, for example, now believed that if Germany wasn't stopped, then all European national independence was just a fiction. In the Mediterranean, the Ottoman Empire began mining the Dardanelles on August the 3rd. Now, the Turks were not yet going to war, and we'll see more of them in a few weeks. But what of Serbia? I mean, this whole thing snowballed because of issues between Serbia and Austria-Hungary, right? Well, we're going to get into that in much more depth next week, I promise. Now, in much of Europe, there was huge optimism about the war. I mean, everybody really thought that they were going to win. Even though by this time there were several million soldiers marching around Europe, this was still the war that would be over by Christmas. The Russian High Command, for example, asked for new typewriters, but were told that the war would not be long enough to justify the expense. And because of all this, everyone's military plans called for huge immediate attacks, since there seemed to be no point saving resources for later when you could just win right now. But here's the thing. The wars people looked back on were short wars like the Franco-Prussian War, but they really should have looked at the American Civil War to get an idea of how long and how bloody modern warfare was going to be. All right.
I mean, would that even been on anybody's radar? I feel like Europeans are very, you guys don't really learn about the Civil War over here or much American history. I know some of you know about it, but from what I've gotten from a lot of Europeans, you guys don't really study American history very in depth. So, and a lot of Brits that I've seen on YouTube say that they know nothing about like the Civil War or the War of Independence. I mean, they've heard of them, but they don't really know anything about it. I'm surprised that he would bring that up because I feel like, I don't know, maybe since it was a more recent event at this time, maybe people around the world would have been a little bit more cognizant of it, but I don't know. It's just a really interesting point. I was not expecting that.
To get an idea of how long and how bloody modern warfare was going to be. All right, on August 5th, the German Empire reached her first serious military obstacle, Liege. Now, that day, the Germans failed to take any of the 12 forts of the city. Ludendorff managed to enter Liege on the 7th, but taking the forts was necessary for the German advance. Germany brought in her big guns, and this was accomplished in only a few days. But this is really important. You see, France and Belgium had strategically placed fortresses all over them. They were very expensive and heavily defended. But one of the first things the war showed was the technological advance in artillery. Heavy howitzers could bombard fortresses from 10 miles away without real fear of retaliation. And the fortresses were just sitting ducks. So all of the fortresses attacked in 1914 fell real quickly, and all that money and all that effort to build them up was for nothing. So, to bring us up to date, on August the 6th, Austria-Hungary officially declared war on Russia, and Serbia declared war on Germany. If you want to know what happened in the last episode, click right here, and let me know. Declared war on Germany. Austria-Hungary officially declared war on Russia, and Serbia declared war on Germany. If you want to know what happened in the last episode, click right here.
Okay guys, it took me a few minutes, but I eventually sorted out who's on what side. So it's just been a little bit since I watched this, and I was having a hard time kind of remembering the alliances exactly. So the only thing I wish Indy Nidell would do differently is actually use the map behind him, because he just kind of like vaguely points at it and doesn't really use it in any detail. So I kind of wish that they would kind of like zoom in on it a little bit, and he would point to a specific location when he's talking about it. Maybe put some cities on the map or something. Other than that, I really do like the way he presents things. It's also really interesting how they just assumed that it would be a short war, and at first I was like, why in the world, like, would you just assume that it would be over very quickly? And then he put kind of like the historical context in place for that. I don't really know, like, again, the history of Europe prior to this, you know, very well or at all, so I don't really know what conflicts he's referring to. So there is a little bit of context missing for me, I think, in this, but hopefully I'll fill that in as time goes on. Anyway, the war's finally underway. Don't really know who fired the first shot. It seems like everybody just kind of mobilized at the same time and started fighting each other. So Germany is going into France very similarly to the way they did in World War II, although I know in World War II they also went up into the Netherlands. That got really hashed out in the World at War series I'm watching on Patreon. One of the first episodes was about that, and so we had kind of like long conversations on Patreon about that whole like invasion strategy of Germany during World War II into France. And so I guess the two front would be France and then Russia, because they're kind of going into Russian Poland, Polish Russia. And before he even mentioned the UK and its alliance with Belgium, I was about to mention, I was like, doesn't the UK have something to do with Belgium? Because you guys have also brought that point up in previous videos. I was expecting that. And those are also very interesting points about how the howitzers, I don't really know the weapons very well, but I have learned through you guys in videos going way back actually that the howitzer was kind of like that, the cannon type thing that they were shooting. The fact it could go 10 miles is insane. Even though it was a technological advance at that time, they still look fairly crude. And so, I don't know, it seems just, even today, like a shell coming out from one of those cannons going 10 miles. I mean, it almost seems like it should be impossible. But yeah, so I'm seeing how this war is, there's a very kind of like old mentality of this is how we're going to fortify ourselves by making these fortresses that are built for armies fighting closer together and being able to defend against that. But when you're shooting a round from 10 miles away, it doesn't matter. Like the whole thing's just going to blow up. This is a very interesting meeting of kind of old military strategy having to come into conflict with new technology. And I think that's going to be a very interesting thing to learn about in World War I. I know World War II had a little bit of that too, to a certain extent, but this is really the first, I think, time that people are having to come to terms with that in modern warfare. But then I also think about the American Civil War, and I know the Gatling gun, which was like the precursor to the machine guns, were used during that back in the 1860s, and so that would have been like a technological revolution that you know, you get one of those firing into a line of soldiers, they're still fighting like Napoleon style, and you get a machine gun shooting at everybody, well, that's not going to go well, you know. So that's another example of kind of old strategies meeting new technology. Yeah, that to me is like really fascinating to learn about. So anyway, I'm going to leave it there. Looking forward to, we're going to do week 3 next. I am trying to get my videos done on a schedule now to kind of like streamline things a little bit more. I'm trying to remember, it's either on Friday or Saturday, so I think we're going to try to do these on Wednesday and then either Friday or Saturday. I can't remember which day. So we'll do 2 episodes a week of this. I also want to give it time for your comments to come in so that I can feature them in comment time for the next video. I hope you guys have enjoyed this video, and if you did and do enjoy my videos in general, I appreciate a like and subscribe. The links to my social media, Discord, and Patreon are in the description and the pinned comments. If you want to look at any of that, look for the next episode of this coming out very soon. And Roger here, and I thank you for watching as always. We'll see you next time.